Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. This is Ahmed Saeed. We will continue in our session today, inshallah, with Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation SSRS reports. We talked on our last session and the session before last session about the DB, how we can use the DB on our report, and how we can use the contract to filter or add parameters to our report. Now, suppose we have a scenario here, or as we discussed, or we figure out while creating a report using a query, we find a great benefit with using the query is the record include, which was appeared here in the parameters. It's helping us to filter or use all tables existing in our query to filter the report. So suppose now we need to add a filtration for this report with item, with customer, with item group, with customer group. So we have here we have some options. We can add these parameters to the contract, but it will be so difficult or a heavy process to add it. We have to define in the contract class all the parameters, and in the future, if the user need to filter with additional information. So how we can use the query with the DB? This is our session today to get all the benefit from using the query on our DB and also to be able to filter all the data existing in the query. So here we added the parameters for the date. Suppose now we need to use the query in our DB. So we already created a query. Let's have a look or a review on our query. We created here a query which called sales invoices query. In this query, we added the cost table, which is the main table, and inside it we add the cost invoice journal to get all the invoices, and we also have the delivery table. So suppose now we need to use this query to be able to filter with all the fields existing on this tables. So it's very easy to use it. We have to go to the DB, and as we saw in our last session, we added here a prefix on the report or in the DB to define the contract class which is responsible for the parameters. By the same way, we can add the query class. So here, let's add the query. We will just hit comma and add SRS report query attribute. And inside this, we will add query str, and we'll add the same query which we created, which is sales invoices query. Let's take the name from here. So now we added our query to the report, to the DB. Let's discover together how we can use that query. So here in our process, as I mentioned in our process, we can add all the logic here because this is the first method will be called while generating the report. So here we define a query. If you, as we saw in our last session, we define the contract. So we have to define the same contract here. So let's start with add our modification here. We have to take an object from the query. So we will add query and it will be query. And we have something called query run. The query run class is the class which was responsible for to run our query. As we will see later, it will be QR, for example, or query run. And we have something called query. Now in our query, we will have to pass the same parameters which we passed here in the contract to the query to filter the query, the dates in the query according to these parameters. So here we have to add query build data source. It will be QPDS, for example, QPDS, and this is the query build data source. We have here three data sources in our query. we have the customers, we have the custom visual. So we will add just a query build data source for the custom visual because we will just filter the invoices according to the date. We will not make any filtration on the customer or in the debtor table. So we will just add one for the custom visual. It will be cast QBDS cast invoice jur.
اقتربت صلاة العصر.
So here we have to also add a range because we will filter the query according to the range. We have something here in the query called ranges. We have to add the ranges here. The ranges will be for here in the custom visual for the invoice date to be able to use this range. So here also we will define something called query build range. So it will be, for example, date range. Now we added all the variables for the query which we will use. We added the query. This will be the same query which we added here to assign this value to this variable. And we have the query run which is responsible for run the query, and we have query build data source. So we have to define this to be able to use the filtration on this query. And also on the query build range we have just one range for the date. So let's start here. After we define the contract and the parameters for the date, let's start with the query. So here, let's start to define the query. So here for the query, we have to assign the query which we added on the DB to this query. So this, it will be this dot bar query. Now we assign the query we defined in the top to this query. And we have here the query build data source. So the query, so here we have to assign the value for custom visual which exists in the query. So it will equal to query dot data source table. So we have here to define the data source. It will be table num to take the number of the table, and it will be cast. It will just take one parameter for the table name. It will be cast invoice jur. Now we take an object from the query build data source to just get the data source which called custom visual which exists here in the query, and assign this value here from the query which we got from the DB query. Now we just need to add the range to our query. So here let's start with date range which we added. It's equal query dot source dot add range. Now for this range, it's required the field ID, so it will be field ID or field, I'm sorry, field num. So field num, and it's take two parameters. First one will be the table, which is cast invoice jur, and the second one will be the field, which is invoice date. Now we assigned from the QBDS or query build data source for the data source custom visual, we assign the range to this variable. So here let's add a value to this range from the parameters date range dot value, and inside this we will add query range, and this query range is take two parameters. The first one with any data type will be from date. The parameter is a variable which we defined and takes the value from the parameter, and the second one will be to date. And now we finished by defining our data source. and select the range, the date range, and here we assign the value which we took from the parameter to our range here. Now we have to run the query. To run the query, as we mentioned, we will use the query run. So query run equal to new query run, and inside it we have to add the query which we need to run it, which we define in the top. And here we will start with loop inside this query to get all the information. So while qr dot sorry query run run dot next, we will start to loop, and inside the loop let's assign all the data sources which exist in the query to the variables which we have here. We have three tables, so we have to assign the values to these tables. So cast table, the, the variable from cast table are equal to query run dot get, and here it's a get or get the table which we need. So the first table will be cast table, so we will use table num, and here we will add cast table to get this table from the query, and also for cast invoice jur it will equal to query run dot get, and here we will define the second table which will be cast invoice jur. The last table we will use here will be their party table, and it will equal to query run dot get, and here we will define the their party table like we did with the customers and we did with the customer voice jur. We will define their party table. So here, what we did here, we just assign the query to query run and start with run the query run to loop all the data existing in the query and to get the tables from or to get the tables from the query and assign this tables to the tables which we have. And here we can take the same code which we added here. Instead of using the loop, we use the query. So we'll just paste it here and comment the code, and here we will just comment this code because we will not use it. So what we did here we just start to define our query in the top of the db, and here we start. If we will make a range for the query, we have to define all of these elements. We have to define the query, we have to define the query run. The query run, as we saw, it will responsible for run the query which we have here. And here we if we will filter on just one data source which we have here, it's the query build data source is the custom voucher. We will just define it, and we will define the range and start to assign or get the data source from the query and get the range for the invoice. And here we assign the values which we will get from the parameters to the range here, and start to run our query and assign the values or the tables which we have on our variables. So let's now uh, to build our project, but first, and deploy and check the result. But first, let's restore our data source here, and here we will be able to use the dynamics filter, so we will make it true. Let's build, and here as we can see here is the dynamics filter added. So let's build the project and deploy the report and check the result together. So after we build the report and deploy the project, build the project and deploy the report. As we can see here, we have the parameters, and it's appear here record include, and we can easily filter with any customers we need. So we can easily filter, click on filter, and we can select the customer name if we need, or also in the customer account, we can select any of the customers we have here. So for example, we will select this customer and press OK, and let's make the date to be 24 and press OK. So as we can see here, we have only the invoices related to this customer. So here in our session today, we learned how we can use the query in the DB to get the benefit of the query, to be able to filter with any table exist in the query, with any field exist in the query, and records include here. We can add any table exist in the query, and we can filter with any field exist in the query, and also we can use the benefit of the DB to control the query by adding the range here, and use this range for the date, for example.